Shut Up and Win: How to Control Without Speaking. In a world obsessed with speaking louder, proving oneself, and chasing approval, silence has become a rare power. But what if true influence lies not in how much you say, but in what you choose not to? From Machiavelli's political cunning to modern psychological depth, this video unveils the hidden power of strategic silence. You'll discover how silence builds mystique, protects your personal freedom, and ultimately puts you in control not just of conversations, but of your life. Stay until the end, because the most powerful message is the one you don't hear, but deeply feel. When a noisy world makes you forget silent power, we live in a world that glorifies noise, an era where every thought and emotion is encouraged to be instantly shared, and even the smallest action can become fodder for public spectacle. Within this relentless flow, we find ourselves trapped in the whirlwind of media and social networks, where constant presence is regarded as the new benchmark of success. Yet amidst all this noise, an ancient form of power is gradually being forgotten: the power of strategic silence. Silence is neither weakness nor lack of confidence when used properly. Silence is a sophisticated form of power, a protective cloak guarding the deepest and most essential parts within each of us. Niccolo Machiavelli, the 16th century Florentine philosopher and statesman, recognized this early on, although famous for blunt advice on wielding power in his book, The Prince. His sharpest insights lie not in what is said, but in what should remain unsaid. Machiavelli wrote that crowds are always captivated by appearances, and it is precisely excessive speech and displays that create illusions, while silence preserves reality intact. In a modern society mechanically obsessed with transparency, those who master the art of silence not only protect their own position, they achieve victories inaccessible to those who constantly chatter. They don't merely survive, they control the flow of information, emotion, and power. Machiavelli lived in a time when a single ill-chosen word could lead to exile or death, even in today's less severe world. Speaking too much or oversharing still creates vulnerabilities. When people rush to express all their thoughts, they inadvertently give others tools for judgment, prediction, and manipulation. In a world full of noise and haste, silent power has never been more necessary. Those who know when to remain silent are not lacking in things to say. Rather, when your words become a trap that binds you, there's an often overlooked paradox. The words we speak to assert ourselves frequently become the very ropes that bind us tightly. Each time we express plans, intentions, or openly reveal our thoughts, we're not merely communicating information, we're voluntarily creating boundaries around ourselves, a framework within which our every subsequent action is measured, judged, and constrained by what we previously articulated. Niccolo Machiavelli saw clearly through the nature of such exposure. He emphasized that people judge more by what they see than by what they genuinely perceive. Once spoken, words become evidence. They open windows through which the outside world peers into our minds, seeing not only what we want them to see, but also the limits and weaknesses we might not even be aware of. Every promise, intentional or not, is an implicit contract others will hold us to if we later change our minds or shift strategies. In their eyes, we immediately become inconsistent or even unreliable. However, by maintaining silence about our intentions, we preserve a precious freedom, the freedom to change direction as necessary, without explanations or apologies. Moreover, excessive talking reveals the inner workings of our minds. When we over-explain or elaborate unnecessarily, we expose our thought processes, highlighting gaps in reasoning, weak points others can exploit to gain advantage. Hence, in interpersonal strategies, intelligent individuals never prematurely disclose their genuine thoughts. Machiavelli further pointed out that silence isn't merely about secrecy. It's also a means to cultivate an image of composure and unpredictability, a subtle form of power that words alone cannot achieve. Those who speak sparingly but effectively ensure each word carries substantial weight, while incessant talkers gradually appear ordinary, predictable, and lose their initial allure. When we ponder why many talented individuals don't achieve their deserved influence, the answer sometimes lies simply in their unnecessary disclosures. Therefore, knowing when to stay silent isn't a sign of lacking confidence, rather, it's profound insight into the mechanics of power and the fragility of personal image within our judgmental world. The hidden cost of speaking too much in life in the modern world, where everyone is encouraged to speak more and showcase themselves frequently. There's a subtle, yet heavy price being paid by those who can't restrain their speech. Few realize that each unnecessary word gradually transfers small fragments of their personal power away without their noticing. Niccolo Machiavelli lived in an era fraught with danger, where a careless utterance could lead to exile or even death. However, the lesson he left behind extends beyond mere political strategy. He recognized that even in less perilous times, reckless speaking naturally creates vulnerabilities. Each spoken word becomes a clue others use to measure, analyze, and often exploit. Those constantly voicing opinions in every meeting soon find themselves taken lightly. Each utterance progressively diminishes their words' authority. Individuals oversharing their personal lives on social media, believing they're connecting, actually make themselves predictable, commonplace, and shallow negotiators unable to bear silence. Hastily filling gaps with concessions often leave the table disadvantaged. Leaders responding to every criticism and countering every opposing view unintentionally weaken their authority. By justifying each action and decision, they diminish themselves to the noise level from which they should rise above. Machiavelli would view this not as sincerity, but as a severe strategic miscalculation, undermining their power in the public eye. The price of excessive talking doesn't manifest immediately. Instead, it silently erodes respect, fades personal charisma, and gradually extinguishes one's capacity for genuine influence. The more someone reveals, the more predictable they become, and once predictable, they lose the element of surprise and the ability to control the game. In the art of social survival, there are things to be said, yet also things better guarded by silence. Knowing when to speak and when to stay silent isn't merely temporary wisdom, but an essential survival skill, foundational for preserving inner strength and long-term power. Not every voice is valuable in this turbulent and competitive world. True power sometimes belongs to those who control the urge to speak, choosing carefully the moment their words can carry maximum weight. 3 secrets of strategic silence to protect your power and freedom. Silence, in the eyes of those who only judge superficially, is often mistaken for weakness, fear, or a lack of confidence. Yet, through Machiavelli's lens, silence is a strategy of immense power when used at the right moments and in the right ways. Silence doesn't merely protect one's personal status, it grants a precious freedom that habitual talkers will never possess. Machiavelli never regarded silence as passive to him. Silence was an active weapon, a strategic tool requiring skillful application based on specific objectives. Within the art of strategic silence, 3 principal forms exist, each serving as a secret to maintaining and expanding personal influence. The first form of silence is silence used to gather information. The impatient often expose themselves from the very beginning, openly revealing their thoughts, goals, and vulnerabilities. The wise, on the contrary, listen patiently, allowing others to reveal their plans, fears, and ambitions in negotiations. The timeless rule always holds true. Whoever speaks first is usually disadvantaged in daily life. Those who listen silently often understand others far better than those accustomed to endless chatter. The second form of silence is silence used to build power. People naturally fill informational gaps with assumptions. When you choose silence strategically, others will create assumptions that serve your interests. A leader doesn't need to comment on every minor issue. Their silence makes each word anticipated, and every decision receives greater respect. Conversely, those who constantly explain, justify, or respond to minor criticisms undermine their own credibility. The third form is silence, used to maintain strategic ambiguity. When you avoid openly declaring your intentions or commitments, you retain maximum flexibility. Others must guess, speculate, and adapt their behavior to multiple possibilities, while you remain free to shift strategies without being bound by prior statements. This isn't deception. It's wisdom in safeguarding your choices and preserving initiative in a volatile world. Machiavelli understood that true power doesn't derive from transparency, but from the ability to withhold what needs to be withheld, speak what needs to be spoken, and, most importantly, knowing there are moments when saying nothing is best. Mastering these three secrets of strategic silence allows you not only to safeguard your position amid unexpected events, but also to secure the most valuable freedom, the freedom from being controlled by the expectations and assumptions of others. Silence to gather information. The power of patience. In any confrontation, whether it's a business negotiation, personal debate, or a hidden battle of office politics, the one who possesses more information always holds a significant advantage. The most effective way to gather information isn't by continuously asking questions or pressuring others. Instead, as Machiavelli pointed out, the simplest and most effective method is silence. The impatient always desire to express themselves, quickly displaying their views and inadvertently revealing their motives and weaknesses. They act as if silence is an intolerable void, immediately needing to be filled with words. But the wise understand that within those silent pauses, the most valuable information naturally emerges. Machiavelli wrote that fools act immediately, while the wise patiently wait by remaining silent during the early stages of any dialogue. You give the other party room to expose themselves. In the absence of clear guidance, people naturally reveal their thoughts, anxieties, and desires. Each word spoken without immediate feedback becomes another puzzle piece, helping you understand their inner world. In negotiation, this immutable principle is summarized neatly. Whoever speaks first loses first. The side unable to endure silence, hastily filling the void with concessions or commitments, always ends up disadvantaged. Those who patiently use silence can compel their opponents to offer greater concessions just to break the tension they themselves feel. In personal relationships, individuals who listen more than they speak often detect deeper emotional layers beneath others' words. They don't get distracted by superficial stories, but rather perceive unspoken desires and hidden fears. Thus, they hold the keys to building genuinely profound and enduring relationships. In competitive environments, from business to politics, prematurely announcing strategies limits your future flexibility. Conversely, individuals who remain silent and patiently await optimal timing usually achieve outcomes surpassing everyone's expectations. The power of silence lies not merely in withholding information, but in the patient observation, collection, and integration of seemingly disconnected pieces into a complete picture. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, those who master silence develop the most enduring, invisible advantage. Building authority by speaking less and being more present. A paradox exists in communication. The less you speak, the more you are heard. True power isn't about dominating conversations, nor does it stem from responding to every question or debate. Power, as Machiavelli emphasized, arises from how you manage your presence, ensuring each spoken word carries weight, and even your silence holds meaning. Humans instinctively fill information gaps with assumptions by choosing carefully when to speak. Every utterance is given special significance. Others speculate, even idealize what you don't say, interpreting your silence as evidence of calmness, confidence, and authority. A leader doesn't need to respond to every criticism. Conversely, maintaining silence in the face of trivial attacks makes every necessary response sharper and more convincing. Leaders who select the precise moments to speak are consistently respected for maturity and inner authority, while those continuously debating and justifying themselves dilute their own words' impact. Observe influential figures across any field: business, politics, or the arts. Those truly powerful rarely speak excessively. They understand that words gain strength through rarity and intentional selection, not from dominating every discussion. A concise statement from them can transform situations entirely, while others exhaust themselves in endless debates and explanations. Machiavelli once compared the ideal leader to a combination of fox and lion. The fox clever enough to spot traps, the lion powerful enough to intimidate enemies, yet both understood that silence could be more intimidating than a roar. When you remain silent, others must guess. When you don't react, they must reconsider their own moves. In that silence, you maintain dominance without needing justification. Speaking less doesn't mean sacrificing authenticity. Rather, it requires immense internal discipline, a profound understanding that authority doesn't involve forcing others to listen, but making them voluntarily attentive to every word or deliberate pause you create. In today's noisy world, where people speak incessantly and overshare to attract attention, choosing strategic silence sets you apart. You're no longer trapped in meaningless competition for attention. Instead, you construct a solid image, quietly formidable yet impossible to ignore. Maintaining strategic ambiguity when non-commitment becomes a victory. In a world where everyone hurriedly demands clarity, commitment, and definite answers, maintaining strategic ambiguity is a sophisticated, high-level art. Not committing, refraining from clearly defining one's stance prematurely, and resisting the urge to rigidly define oneself through absolute statements. These can sometimes form the foundation of genuine power. Machiavelli, who faced some of history's harshest political upheavals, understood well that ambiguity often provides greater advantage than transparency. When you keep your intentions in a gray area, you force others into speculation. Some will hope you side with them. Others will fear your opposition while they debate, guess, and adapt their actions according to their own imagined scenarios. You retain ultimate initiative, the power to choose the timing and method of your actions when conditions become favorable. An early, explicit declaration can significantly reduce flexibility. When you firmly establish a position, you confine yourself within it, and any later shift risks being viewed as inconsistent or disloyal. But by keeping possibilities open and statements suitably vague, you create multiple exits for yourself, allowing quick adaptations to changing realities. In politics, the most successful leaders often use deliberate ambiguity. They communicate messages broad enough to achieve consensus among diverse groups. People hear what they wish to hear. Opponents struggle to clearly identify targets for attack. Meanwhile, the leader, by refusing to lock themselves into absolute commitments, maintains the freedom to adjust strategy as needed. In personal life, strategic ambiguity offers similar value. Refraining from prematurely revealing all your plans or overly sharing long-term goals protects you from unnecessary scrutiny and safeguards unfinished ideas from inadvertent sabotage by those around you. Silence during sensitive moments isn't a sign of weakness. It's the action of someone aware that hastily exposing everything makes oneself more vulnerable. Machiavelli advised prioritizing silence and ambiguity when commitment might prove disadvantageous, not for deceit, but to maintain flexibility and autonomy in an ever-changing world. Mastering strategic ambiguity helps you avoid traps created by your own words and discreetly expands your operational freedom. The remarkable psychological effect of timely silence is not just a communication strategy, it's also a powerful psychological force, quietly affecting others far more deeply than words ever could. While words typically direct listeners towards specific content, silence creates an open space where people's minds automatically fill gaps with assumptions, fears, expectations, and subjective interpretations. Therefore, silence becomes a mirror reflecting the inner states of others. People observe your silence and project onto it their own worries, desires, or denials. This is why, in psychology and interrogation, silence is often used more effectively than rapid questioning. Timely silence makes others uncomfortable, compelling them to fill the void with information they would normally keep hidden. Machiavelli clearly understood this, noting that humans are fundamentally simple and easily guided by immediate needs. By remaining silent, you prompt others to unwittingly reveal themselves. They attempt to read you, trying to anticipate your moves, and in doing so, they expose aspects they intended to hide. In negotiations, this effect becomes especially evident. The side more comfortable with prolonged silence usually achieves more advantageous terms. The side troubled by silence typically begins conceding first. Just a few seconds of silence following a proposal can generate enough pressure to make the other party uneasy, prompting them to disclose more or alter their position. Silence also establishes an upper hand in communication. Individuals who speak excessively inadvertently convey insecurity, as though desperate to persuade, please, or seek approval. Conversely, those who remain silent, waiting and speaking only when necessary, occupy a position of judgment without actively competing. They influence others to adapt behavior accordingly. Finally, silence cultivates a mystique that prevents others from easily reading you. Those who overshare become predictable, losing initiative. Conversely, those who master timely silence don't merely stand out, they become uniquely powerful. They have nothing to prove, and ultimately, their silence speaks louder than words ever could. When silence creates status and understanding goes beyond words, in any dialogue, those who speak first, longest, and explain the most are typically seeking recognition. Conversely, those who remain silent, listen carefully, and respond selectively often hold higher status. This truth underscores power in communication not derived from words, but from managing one's own presence. Machiavelli pointed out that people are driven by the desire to be liked, heard, and understood, yet this desire can easily lead one into seeking approval. The more one speaks, the more one reveals this underlying need, inadvertently giving away initiative. Those who remain silent, however, compel others to lean toward them, speculate, and react. They shift from dialogue to dictating the interaction's direction. Timely silence compels others to confront themselves. They begin to feel the imbalance in interaction. One side seeks validation, while the other observes and waits. This waiting exerts a unique form of gravity, the gravity of holding the power to choose. In interviews, candidates who ask thoughtful questions rather than excessively discussing themselves are often more highly regarded. They demonstrate genuine interest while subtly communicating, "I'm evaluating you as well," not just vice versa. In meetings, those who speak less yet offer sharp insights are perceived as deep thinkers with independent minds rather than attention seekers in personal conflicts. Those who listen fully without rushing to respond have the greatest emotional influence, prompting others to self-adjust at a deeper level. Silence is not merely strategic, it signifies inner peace. When you no longer feel the urge to prove yourself, fear misunderstanding, or seek validation, you truly begin controlling relationships. Status doesn't arise from raised voices or imposed dominance. It emerges from the ability to make others seriously listen when you choose to speak. This occurs only when your silence reflects genuine composure, not forced. Timely silence not only preserves your status, but also creates space for others to reflect deeply upon themselves, where understanding transcends words. Silence doesn't just protect you, it creates a mystical attraction. One of the greatest secrets of charisma doesn't lie in appearance. Voice. What is most visible is also most easily overlooked. People aren't afraid of what has already been revealed. They fear what remains unknown. They don't admire someone who constantly explains themselves. They admire those who make them wonder, imagine, and fill the gaps with their own imagination. When you share everything from your ideas and emotions to your life, plans, you gradually become understandable, predictable, and eventually, and not overly expressing yourself, you give others the sense that there is more to you than meets the eye. That marks the starting point of genuine attraction. Machiavelli emphasized that people judge more by sight than by touch, meaning they're easily impressed by appearances rather than substance. But he also subtly pointed out something deeper. Things not clearly visible, things not fully exposed, are often presumed to be more formidable and profound in leadership. If you explain your entire decision-making process, you inadvertently invite others to view you as their equal. But if you share only results, keeping the deeper thoughts to yourself, others automatically assume you know more, think deeper, and see further. Mystical attraction doesn't arise from deliberate concealment, but rather from your ability to hold back what doesn't need to be revealed. It reflects a type of control, not merely over others, but also over yourself. You don't need to flaunt to get attention, nor do you need to overshare to be understood. Your presence, particularly through what remains unsaid, compels others to move toward you, not because you call them, but because they are naturally drawn to you. In a world overly accustomed to revealing everything from private lives to fragmented emotions, silence, if nurtured through inner strength and moderation, is precisely what sets you apart. You don't need many words to leave an impression sometimes. It's precisely the space you leave behind that makes it impossible for others to look away. The sweet trap of transparency and the price of excessive honesty. Modern society continually encourages transparency, honesty, and living true to oneself. We're advised to share our emotions, openly express our thoughts, and publicly state our goals as if transparency is an absolute virtue, and mere sincerity will earn understanding and recognition. Yet Machiavelli, who may use it against you, transparency itself isn't wrong, but unconditional transparency, lacking boundaries and strategy, reflects naivete in a world where all information can become commodities, weapons, or tools of manipulation. When you reveal yourself prematurely, you tie yourself to statements not fully matured. When you express emotions too openly, you empower others to judge and control those emotions. When you try to say everything to be understood, you lose your right to keep sacred, private matters to yourself. Machiavelli wrote, "Promises were necessary in the past, but betrayal is unavoidable in the present." This was not encouragement of deceit, but a reminder that people change, circumstances change, and binding yourself unconditionally to previous statements sometimes suffocates strategic flexibility. This is the cost of excessive honesty, losing freedom of action, the ability to pivot, and the position you otherwise could have preserved. In professional environments, this is especially clear. People who reveal their work plans prematurely without seeing the whole picture are perceived as careless leaders who publicly announce strategic moves too early, soon find competitors exploiting vulnerabilities to counterattack in personal relationships. Excessive honesty can pressure others into roles they're unprepared to assume, or worse, offer opportunities to control you in return. The issue isn't kindness or sincerity itself. The problem lies in how, when, and with whom they're used. Indiscriminate honesty is akin to a room without doors anyone can enter without permission, making you no longer master of your own space. Honesty should be accompanied by wisdom. Transparency should occur only when it fosters genuine understanding and connection, not merely to meet expectations or gain approval. When you realize this, you no longer view silence as coldness, but as a way to preserve your personal values. When you do speak, each word becomes a deliberate choice, not to reveal yourself carelessly, but to create meaningful connections. Victory doesn't require shouting, just silence and action. In a society where everyone is constantly speaking, proving themselves, and striving to assert their identity through words, there's a certain type of person who is nearly invisible. They don't speak frequently, don't publicly declare their goals, and don't flaunt their actions. Instead, they quietly observe, prepare, and act at precisely the right moment, and when results finally emerge, they've advanced far beyond those who loudly proclaimed their victories. Machiavelli once emphasized, the greatest influence does not come from noise, but from the ability to remain unpredictable. Those who choose silence over reaction, who maintain initiative rather than chase external validation, always maintain the upper hand, not by struggling openly, but by compelling others to step back on their own accord. True victory doesn't need to be announced in advance. When you speak too soon, you create expectations for others, tie yourself unnecessarily to outcomes, and turn the action process into a performance. Meanwhile, the silent individual, who refrains from revealing strategies or announcing plans, retains the freedom to adjust paths according to circumstances, unbound by previously spoken words. The difference lies in who controls the game. People who speak too much unintentionally transfer control to their listeners. They allow others to respond, judge, and ultimately influence their emotions and decisions. In contrast, silent yet proactive people don't require external validation. They don't need to hear, "You're right," because they already understand clearly when to speak and when to let results speak for themselves. Observe genuinely capable people. They never argue for recognition, nor do they try to prove their correctness. They let actions and outcomes speak on their behalf. Precisely because they don't need others' approval, they act more freely, forcefully, and persistently. They aren't exhausted by the need to perform. They don't carry the crowd's expectations upon their shoulders. Victory, in Machiavelli's philosophy, doesn't come from declarations. It comes from persistence, calculation, and the ability to endure misunderstandings in silence. Intelligent individuals don't need to speak loudly to gain respect. They work deeply and authentically. And eventually, while everyone else is still loudly debating right and wrong, they've quietly moved so far ahead, they no longer even need to argue. Silence doesn't equate to refusing to act. Silence prepares deeper, more impactful action sometimes. That very silence is the strongest signal. You're moving forward quietly, yet unstoppably. Practicing strategic silence, mastering self-control in critical moments. Silence is not merely a state, it is a skill. And like every skill, it requires practice. Not everyone is born knowing when to remain silent or when to speak. Impulsive reactions are instinctual. Deliberate silence, however, is the product of training. awareness, and above all, self-control. In reality, most of us stay silent, not out of strategy, but out of fear. When we do speak, it's often because we cannot endure feeling misunderstood, ignored, or provoked. It is precisely in these situations that silence truly proves its value. These are the moments when our instincts push us to react impulsively, and, if uncontrolled, we may say things that cause us to lose the initiative and the power we originally held. Practicing silence means learning to observe before speaking. It means taking the time to understand the positions, desires, and vulnerabilities of others. Rather than hastily stating your viewpoint, it means realizing that, in arguments, victory doesn't necessarily belong to the one who speaks most convincingly, but rather to the one who knows when to conclude the dialogue calmly. Machiavelli once remarked that the fox must be cunning enough to avoid traps, and the lion strong enough to ward off enemies. Yet the common trait between both is patience. Those who carefully observe know precisely when to step back and when to move forward. Those adept at silence won't be compelled to act without sufficient information or favorable circumstances. Nor will they inadvertently place themselves in a passive position simply because they crave being heard. Strategic silence is not about avoidance. It is a conscious choice to preserve one's power by not immediately reacting. You maintain the ability to alter your course by not answering every question. You force others to reconsider before they attack by not explaining every decision. You leave a space that compels others to be more cautious in how they treat you. Practicing silence also grants clearer self-awareness by refusing to be swept away by the current of conversation. You create room for self-questioning and self-correction. You step back to see the broader perspective. Rather than being absorbed by details, you become the master of your emotions rather than being dominated by them. Silence, used at the right moments, becomes the ultimate expression of inner strength. It requires no justification, nor superficial victories. It allows you freedom of thought, strategic action, and a life not driven by others' expectations or provocations. When you master silence at the very moment everyone else feels compelled to speak, you achieve a form of self-control few ever truly attain. True masters do not argue. They let silence speak for them. In a world constantly boiling with arguments, where each voice seeks to drown out the one before, a single individual's silence can resonate louder than them all, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand deeply. True value isn't measured by the quantity of spoken words, but by the weight of what remains unsaid. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He didn't teach people to speak less, to appear cunning or cold-hearted instead. He taught that certain truths reveal themselves only in silence. Some powers exist solely when we refuse to react, compete, or prove ourselves right. A true master in human interactions isn't someone who wins every debate, but someone who compels opponents to change without uttering a single argumentative word. The more mature one's inner life becomes, the clearer they see that constant validation isn't necessary. They don't require others to acknowledge their correctness, nor do they need to speak in every situation. They choose silence, not because they've lost, but because they've transcended the phase of ego defense. They do not impose their views, they simply control themselves. And their silence serves as the clearest evidence of this mastery. A person whose inner self isn't stable cannot endure being misunderstood, frantically seeking ways to justify and prove their innocence or correctness. Conversely, someone who comprehends life, understands themselves, and recognizes the principles of influence will quietly step back, observe, and act only when necessary. They don't need verbal victories. They win through steadiness, depth, and mastery over their internal energy in the face of external challenges. We often admire eloquent, persuasive, articulate individuals, but there's another, thought rarer, and more admirable type, those who make you listen even when they say nothing. They compel deeper reflection with each glance, each action, and each pause they create. Their silent presence generates genuine respect, no explanations or arguments needed. True masters don't speak to gain recognition. They allow silence to guide the way, not due to a lack of something to say, but because they recognize that when words cease to be necessary, silence becomes genuinely powerful. In a noisy world, they move quietly like a gentle breeze, leaving few audible traces yet changing the direction of everything they touch.